Last time we looked at how we can put modules together to create weird riffs. So the concept of that hopefully is something that you've seen now, but if you haven't, then please watch the first video of my preset tutorial before moving forward here. What I'm interested in exploring is how simple ideas that we come up with in our mind can be displaced in interesting ways that are more complex than we can immediately imagine. To use Beat Scholar to be able to help us with that, and then take those simple, weird time ideas and think a bit more fractally with them. For example, how a kick drum relates to the bass guitar, how the bass guitar and the guitar relate to each other. What kind of a picture are we creating within those three worlds? So what I have is a project here that has GGD Invasion for drums, it has Odin for guitars, going into some amps, I think some archetype stuff. And then bass, I've got, I think it's Djent bass going on here. Yes, it is. Good old Djent. So yeah, we've got a nice selection of instruments that sound quite inspiring. Now, you don't have to do MIDI guitars. If you're a guitarist primarily and you come up with your ideas in the drum world, you can kind of take those ideas and go from there. But for me, I'm a good guitarist, but I'm not good enough to play this kind of stuff. So while the version that I will learn on the guitar will sound better than what I write with here, I still need to start from somewhere, and that somewhere has to be a point of inspiration. The creativity of this has to come from me, from within my mind, from something that I want to hear the sound of. So I've got a completely blank slate here. Start with my beat calculator is always a good place to go. Got to come up with some kind of vibe. I've had a few ideas knocking around in my head. So like one thing that could be really cool that I'm hearing in my head a little bit is something that's like like that, but I can hear that over a metronome because I've been doing it 10 plus years, but that could be just in your head, some of this is like, and it's like, oh, how does that work over a click? I don't know. So that's where we'll get this to come together. So I'm going to stick with that tempo because I'm quite interested. So that's where I want to hear the groove. Apparently that's like 90. So we could probably make this a bit better by going to like 180 and then just halving our subdivisions. So I'm going to go for that. So our click's going to sound like this. Sounds about right. So now we're going to be working in 8th notes rather than 16th, because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that idea that I was thinking of was like da-dan, 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 da-dan. So that could be like dun da. So I'm just in a pattern mode here, and so I've gone bum bam bum bam, and then this one will be bum bum bam. So that's 4 notes total with 3 on and 1 off. We've had our kick drum selected. We're drawing in at 127 velocity for maximum punch. So when we listen to this, basically Beat Scholar as an instrument track is feeding into the drums instrument track, and I can just turn on the monitor button and we'll hear. That's a cool riff, but repetition gets old quick, and a lot of the balance of this genre for me is in new information versus old information. How repetitive is it? How complicated is the repeat? And it's very easy as a writer to get bogged down in, this doesn't sound exciting, therefore it must be undercomplicated. That can be a problem, but it can also be a solution. We do want to make it complex enough that it's not immediately graspable, but it wants you to work out more. Like, we like that in our EDM, we like that in our high energy music. It's one of the reasons why kids music has so many time signatures, I think. So, and by that I mean music for kids TV shows. So we can start with our 3/8. Now once we've got more than a few bars, we might start getting a bit lost in where we are, so I can switch to the bars view here, and then I can create a new 3/8. Now, the modification I might come up with in my head would be like bam, 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 bam. Then I don't know whether or not my modifier is going to be that I want this to be a bit longer, the bam, 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 or add or remove a da-dan, da-dan. So there's a few ways that we could go about it. We can try them all out. There's nothing stopping us from trying them all out. So let's have a look. We got boom bam, boom bam, boom boom bam, boom bam, boom bam. Maybe let's go for a 5/8 bar, bam. And let's just hear how that sounds like on the kick drum. Bam, 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 down, down, down. That would be a nice looping point at that point. So we can start with that as our riff. So we've got our kick drums here. Now what we might want to do is have some varying MIDI notes for various other things. Now I don't think I'm going to use much of the drums here, so I'm going to repurpose some of this percussion into some notes. For example, I think I'm going to go for like a D1 as my guitar. And one of the things I've done in this template is I've turned these into key switches. Key switches are when you feed MIDI information into a guitar plugin, for example, and it will change what kind of articulation is being played. So I've programmed this to be down pick open, down pick muted, palm muted, and a percussive chug. So those are just a few options. I don't want to get too complicated because we've got limited options inside Beat Scholar, dealing with single notes, single articulations. We're not trying to put multiple things on top of each other for now. So that's how I will feed this information in. We can consider that to be our kick drum line, and then we can mute that. Using the same thing, I can just go to guitars, make sure that Beat Scholar is rooted there. And now I've got that note that I was going to pick, D1. That works. Here's this guitar line that we can make use of. Now it might seem kind of boring, but what we can do is add key switches to that. Like, this is a big part of MIDI guitar. So remember, we've got open, muted, percussive. So that's like a ch or a kung or something like that. So we could go mute, open. And also one thing you might not know is that, so yeah, you can press the keyboard keys to select this. For example, this is Y, U, and I on a QWERTY keyboard. So that makes it a bit easier to lay stuff in. So we've got mute, open, mute, open. Mute, mute, open, mute, open, mute, open, mute, 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 open. That's a nice way to have like a planned riff. Now, we could totally add in an extra note somewhere, like maybe on this pattern here, D1, just something that can distinguish it. Maybe we'll go for like D2, and we could have an extra line that could be like bonus notes. Maybe, and that would be that note. It's cool, isn't it? So that's our extra note, that's our key switches, and that's our chugs. So we could start by pulling the chugs in. Cubase has this very interesting issue with handling global MIDI information. I'll show you something very interesting. There's this interesting preference in Cubase which makes MIDI tempo information either be completely ignored or completely committed to. So this is a Cubase bug, but for example, I've always found that the only way to get MIDI info from a MIDI file was to make a new project with that MIDI file and then drag it in, which is long. I've seen in other DAWs you can drag MIDI into a project and you'll get all the tempo. That's this setting here. It's called Ignore Master Track Events on Merge. It's in Preferences, MIDI file. Now, it's because the way that you drag stuff from Beat Scholar is a MIDI file. That's a super, super useful thing. So we're going to have the ignoring of that off. Now, that is going to mean that when we drag in this pattern, I've muted everything except for the guitar notes, which means that when I shift drag from this pattern, only the guitar is going to come through. But it does mean that the note lengths have come in, the bar lengths have come in, but so have these time signatures. So for a while, we're going to have those there. I'm going to drag a bunch of things into my DAW over different tracks. What I'll do is I'll just unmute the kicks. I'll drag them here. We've got these time signatures we're going to get rid of in a little bit, but I'll keep them in for now. We're going to go for this note and its higher note as one version. And then I'll do another version without the higher note here, just to be able to make use of later. And then the key switches separately. And we'll do those over both of these. Now I'll use lane view to be able to see everything that's happening. And then we can copy that onto there as well. Now, we can now get rid of all this erroneous time signature information. That will mess up a project at first, but if you know about it, you can control it. Maybe your DAW doesn't have that problem. So we've got here in the guitar lanes, notes and key switches. If you want to colorize that, you totally can. Do whatever you want to keep that like organized. But yeah. And one thing we could do with this single note version that we did is I could put that on the bass. So now we've got that riff and we can copy it, duplicate it, and allow that to go over the bar line by just hitting duplicate, 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 and pick our ending point. We could have used Beat Scholar's MIDI input to do that, but you can see how the fragments of this riff have all come from the same place. And I feel like that's a good looping point. That's a nice long 8-bar section, something quite open. Now we're going to need some actual drum beats over that. We could use Beat Scholar to throw that in. So what we can do is go for a whole new pattern. So we can find a cymbal somewhere. There we go. That one's accidental, but that's fine. So we can go. Now we could look at this in various different ways. Let's try keeping it in 4/4. And we can even throw some ghost notes in with this. For example, if I go to like 40 as my MIDI input velocity, I can control click and drag, and now we can make these into separate parts. So that just gives us access to those 8th notes there. It'd be quite easy for us to just allow that to be the top end of it, but we can drag the MIDI in as well. We could name it to whatever we want to name it as well, like and just drag it in over the drums like that. And in Cubase, I like to keep the lanes open so I can see different elements. I don't have to glue them together. This could now be. You see, it's even retained the name 4/4 main cymbals. We've turned monitor off, so now we're just hearing what comes from the MIDI itself. It's a cool riff, but maybe it would be nicer at a slightly faster speed. I might try that at like 195. We only had access to one set of notes in the guitars, so this could be one version, but we can play with changing what the guitar notes were doing. Just going as a pattern, And that will now sound more and more complicated as it goes on. Maybe these could be an octave lower, maybe not. That's a very, very low note. That would have been quite tricky for us to do inside of Beat Scholar with those multiple notes because we've only got so many that we can work with. So that kind of a change I think is really good to do inside of DAW. I want to come up with a different version of this now. I'm going to move these later so that I can enjoy the front rolling of Beat Scholar just going at the beginning of the project. I'm going to go back to this crazy version. We're going to stick to our kicks, and I'm going to turn this into like a more complicated kick version. So I'm going to turn every one kick into two kicks and every no kick into a kick. That's going to basically make it go bida-bida-bum, 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 instead of dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Remember, fractals are important here. Working from one set of information and creating multiple different things. Variations, allowing us to go, you know, I don't really want to go to a triplet there. So this now, that's quite cool. That we've got that variation. I should have probably duplicated this before I started doing it, but here we are, being destructive with our planning. We've only got the kick drums unmuted, so click and drag the drums, lose those time signatures. Let's get the cymbals over. And then we can copy those. Just duplicate until we get to the end of that section. Cut the end off. That'll do. You know what? I think this one would sound better with 2 bars of 4, having just being like a double halftime. I think that will suit it better. So let's have a listen. So this is going to be more like, and then we'll go ahead and do ghost notes around it. So we're gonna go dun get gets get gan gets get gan. We'll go for 60 this time. Do that that's that gan gets get. That'll do it. Let's drag you in. Now unmonitoring Beat Scholar means we're listening entirely to the MIDI. Let's look at how the guitars can work with that vibe. So we could actually just modify our kicks and go destructive with this and just take our kicks and move them to a different note. And then there should be a D2 somewhere. We could make it that one, for example. And now every single kick can be a higher note. We can change our key switches to just be mute, open. Mute, open. Mute, open, mute, open. Mute, open. We could actually get those multiple notes in here. We can now set up those 3 notes. So The problem is that we've gone for a downstroke mute, which is a little bit too much. So we'll just drag that down to the alternate mute. That sounds a bit more realistic, doesn't it? Now we can drag that in. That pattern's sounding great, so let's just get it in there. Shift drag, 2 guitars, off it is. Get rid of the time signatures. Copy, 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 copy. And now we've got riff plus key switches. So maybe we're going to want to have bass without those notes. You know, the higher notes, just the lower notes. Now, we could have planned for this a bit better by having these notes be on a different track, because then we could have just muted them. But that's okay, we don't actually need to do that. If we just go, we can just basically double click, or, you know, just get rid of whatever notes were on them for now. It really depends how much you want to go backwards from this, but I think once you've got the idea, you really don't need to like overplan it. We can get rid of the key switches because we're not going to need them for drums. And then we'll drag H onto the bass. Oh, I'll put it here so we can get rid of the time signatures. Nearly screwed up my tempo there. Here we are. Now we could hear a version that just has the guitars chugging with the bass. Now it's just a matter of structuring. So I hope you can see there how Beat Scholar can take our writing elements and just make them expand to pretty much infinite horizons by taking these little ideas and just manipulating them little bits and hearing how guitars and bass do their stuff around the kick and how these different elements can intertwine. We can write some really nice sounding stuff, but it always gets better once you're really playing the stuff. So I would take something like this, I would go in on the guitar, I would learn the notes for it, and I would come up with something more complex after it. But that's the ultimate goal. I couldn't have gotten there so easily if I hadn't have heard what the repetition sounded like in the first place. So this is just one point on that writing pathway. You can then take that and go in pretty much any direction. I pretty much used a very similar method to write Somnus by Monuments. It's what happened when I picked up the guitar and started working out how to actually play it and started recording it, that it worked out well. And I could play it in slowly and then speed it up so that I could make up for that lack of skill there and get better on the instrument and not let my skill level denote the sound of the writing I could make. Because this is ultimately all about allowing us to write music that's a little bit above our skill level so that we can then practice that and get our skill level up. I think that's the best way to roll with this kind of stuff, is just to not feel limited by your skill level and to let tools like this help you to increase your level and to get more comfortable with this kind of a genre. So hopefully that's inspired you somewhat. I'm feeling very inspired. I want to go off and write some more now. But yeah, I look forward to seeing what you do with it. Again, if you didn't see the first video on how I came up with the modules and that kind of stuff, you might benefit from watching that first video. But I hope you've enjoyed this, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one where we explore this some more. Take care.